Trump's latest lumber tariff scheme is blowing up in spectacular fashion, and American families are about to pay the price. While the president claims his 10% tariff on Canadian lumber will boost U.S. production and create jobs, the reality is far more damaging. Canadian lumber now faces tariffs exceeding 45%, making it more expensive than lumber from Russia. Yes, Russia. And guess who's going to foot the bill for this economic disaster? Every American trying to buy or build a home. The numbers tell a brutal story. The U.S. imports about 40% of the softwood lumber the nation uses each year, with more than 80% of that coming from Canada. This isn't some luxury import we can easily replace. This is the backbone of American home construction. Lumber, especially softwood lumber like pine and spruce, is critical to U.S. home construction. Its availability and price directly affect housing costs and broader economic activity in the building sector. What makes this particularly devastating is that the Americans have identified strategic sectors, including steel, aluminum, autos, forest products, and pharmaceuticals, where they've taken trade actions against everybody in the world, including the critical lumber sector that keeps American construction moving.
Is that there are certain sectors, steel, aluminum, autos, forest products, pharmaceuticals, where the Americans have decided are strategic, and they have trade actions against the rest, everybody in the world. And we are negotiating specific sectoral deals with them, which would likely persist with a revised USMCA, okay? Because their 232 actions to use that with the rest of the world will persist. So
these aren't isolated decisions. They're part of a broader pattern of economic nationalism that ignores how modern supply chains actually work. Trump's grand plan sounds simple enough. The U.S. aims to meet 95% of its softwood lumber demand domestically. But here's where his economic fantasy crashes into reality. Industry experts are warning that this isn't just unrealistic, it's economically reckless. The United States has 300 billion trees, but economists and home builders caution that America does not currently have the industrial capacity to meet demand, and that placing a significant tariff on Canadian lumber imports could further exacerbate the ongoing housing affordability crisis. The tariff escalation has been relentless and devastating. The biggest blow will fall on Canada, the U.S.'s top lumber supplier, whose lumber exports are already subject to separate duties totaling 35.19%. The U.S. leader recently announced an additional 10% levy on softwood lumber, bringing the total tariff on such products to 45%, which BC Premier David Eby said at a news conference Tuesday is higher than the tariff the U.S. imposes on lumber from Russia. Let that sink in for a moment. Trump is punishing America's closest ally and trading partner with higher tariffs than he imposes on Russia. In a letter to the feds, Eby points out that Canada is subject to higher tariffs on lumber than Russia. He said the province will be launching an advertising campaign in the United States to point this out. This isn't just poor economics, it's geopolitically absurd. This reflects Trump's zero-sum approach to trade negotiations, where he wants to win at any cost, even if it means hurting American consumers.
I think, to your point, I think that when it comes to those across-the-board tariffs, I think Canada will, especially in those industries, will be facing some sort of tariff. Howard Lutnick made it very clear in his comments recently that any deal on certain sectors is going to be America first, Canada second. That is the approach of the administration, and that's not just been the approach of the administration to Canada, but across the board. But I think the challenge for the Carney government is going to be, when are we actually going to see some details? We hear soon, soon, soon. This was a prime minister during the election campaign. He said the deepening integration of our economy with the United States, including economic and military and defense, is over. In the Oval Office, he said there's $1 trillion of investments going to the United States. He said a number of things that certainly Canadians did not expect to him. So I think Canadians are going to say, okay, smart guy, when is it?
His administration has made it clear that any deal will be America first, Canada second, with his unpredictable negotiating style actually hurting some American industries in the process. The timing couldn't be worse for American consumers. The measures take effect at 8 a.m. On October 14th, adding another layer to the administration's aggressive trade policy approach. Canadian softwood lumber entering the U.S. will now see total import taxes exceeding 45%. These aren't abstract numbers. They translate directly into higher costs for every American family looking to build, renovate, or buy a home. The justification Trump is using reveals just how desperate this policy has become. The president invoked Section 232 of the Trade Act of 1974, arguing that timber and furniture imports threaten national security by weakening domestic wood industries. In the proclamation, Trump said that the wood tariffs were necessary to shore up America's local industries and support national security. In my judgment, the actions in this proclamation will, among other things, strengthen supply chains, bolster industrial resilience, create high-quality jobs, and increase domestic capacity utilization for wood products, such that the United States can fully satisfy domestic consumption, while also creating economic benefits through increased exports, Trump wrote. But here's the problem with Trump's national security argument. It's complete nonsense. These tariffs will not improve U.S. national security. They will only drive up lumber costs, making housing even less affordable for American families, and undermining the integrated trade relationship that benefits both our countries, said Council President Kurt Niquidet in a statement. This broad action further undermines a deeply integrated North American supply chain that supports housing affordability, infrastructure, manufacturing, and shared prosperity and security on both sides of the border. The Canadian response has been swift and pointed. BC Premier David Eby is calling on the federal government to support workers whose jobs are put at risk by the unfair and unjustified attack on the Canadian forestry industry by U.S. President Donald Trump. The Premier described the latest tariffs as an existential threat to the forestry industry and said BC and Canada must work to find alternative markets for its products while supporting workers and communities facing curtailments. Canadian officials are working on deals for steel, aluminum, and energy projects while continuing to fight for workers in all sectors, suggesting they might continue buying parts while abandoning the workers who build complete vehicles.
So listen, I won't go into the details of the negotiation. What you heard from the Prime Minister is at this point is we're looking to have a deal on steel, aluminum, and also energy projects. So this is what is being worked on. But we know also that we need one on auto, and we need one on copper, and we need one also on lumber, because these are all tariff industries. So we're going into an approach where we are doing one at a time. But at the same time, we will continue to fight for our auto workers. That's clear.
I do want to, though, based on what you just said, in combination with what we heard from Howard Lutnick, ask you about the prospect of one. I understand that you don't want to, disclose the details of the negotiations, but do I take from what you just said and what we heard from the Prime Minister that there won't be any deal on autos anytime soon? Howard Lutnick was pretty much explicit that Canada, he said, should come second to the United States, that maybe they'll continue buying.
Despite these challenges, Canada is trying to protect jobs in tariff-affected sectors, including steel, aluminum, auto, copper, and lumber. The economic impact is already being felt across North America. The move will threaten the livelihoods of 200,000 Canadians connected to the industry and the stability of hundreds of towns and cities that rely on a strong forest sector, the industry body said in a statement. But the damage won't stop at the Canadian border. This move will also have an impact on the U.S. construction industry, since 75% of softwood lumber imports coming into the U.S. are Canadian. It's not quite that simple, industry experts argue. They warn tariffs could end up increasing lumber and building costs and even push up housing prices for consumers. The United States has 300 billion trees, but economists and homebuilders caution that America does not currently have the industrial capacity to meet demand, and that placing a significant tariff on Canadian lumber imports could further exacerbate the ongoing housing affordability crisis. Trump's broader tariff strategy is also hitting furniture and kitchen cabinets. He also announced a 25% tariff on kitchen cabinets, vanities, and upholstered wooden furniture. The 25% tariff on kitchen cabinets will also hit Canada, since 1/5 of all kitchen cabinets made in Canada were exported to the U.S. As of Tuesday, Canada faces a higher tariff on kitchen cabinets than Europe does. The furniture industry is already feeling the pain. Shares of Wayfair, RH, and Williams-Sonoma have tumbled in recent days as Trump threatened the tariffs. Furniture prices had largely fallen for the past 2.5 years prior to Trump's tariffs. Now American families will see those savings evaporate. What makes this economic disaster even worse is that it's based on a fundamental misunderstanding of how modern supply chains work. The two countries have been locked in a decades-long dispute over U.S. claims that Canada unfairly subsidizes its lumber industry and sells the commodity below market rates. The U.S. has long accused Canada's softwood lumber sector of violating rules on anti-dumping, flooding a market with cheaper, subsidized products to disrupt a domestic industry. But the reality is far more complex. Canada and the United States have developed an integrated forestry sector over decades. Expanding the scope of this action to include products like furniture and kitchen cabinetry is reckless, harmful to the economy, and further destabilizes the broader North American forest sector supply chain, said the association's president and CEO, Derek Neiber, in a statement. The immediate consequences are already visible. Raymond James Limited analyst Daryl Swetleshoff said the stage has been set for additional decreases in lumber capacity in Canada over the next 6 to 12 months. RBC Capital Markets analyst Matthew McKellar said the new tariffs will place extra pressure on Canadian producers. Tariffs will potentially accelerate curtailments of Canadian supply, he said in a research note. This supply reduction won't help American consumers. It will hurt them. When Canadian producers curtail operations, the overall North American lumber supply shrinks, driving up prices for everyone. This misguided move risks raising housing costs in the United States and undermines the integrated trade relationship that has provided jobs, investment, and prosperity in both countries. Trump's attempt to boost domestic production faces massive structural challenges that tariffs alone cannot solve. To boost U.S. logging, in March, Trump issued an executive order telling the Departments of Interior and Agriculture to ease what he called heavy-handed regulations on timber harvesting. The executive order and a follow-up memo from Agriculture Secretary Brooke Rollins do not spell out specifics, but officials say more details are in the works that will simplify the timber harvesting process with the goal of boosting domestic timber production by 25%. But even if these regulatory changes work, and that's a big if, the timeline for meaningful domestic capacity expansion is measured in years, not months. In addition, the amount of lumber imported tends to mirror the boom and bust cycles of housing construction, a dynamic that tariffs alone are unlikely to change. The business community has been sounding alarms about this policy disaster. The U.S. Chamber of Commerce opposed any restrictions when the Commerce Department launched its national security investigation into lumber imports in April. The business group argued that these goods pose no genuine security risk and that tariffs would increase construction costs, hurt American paper exports, and reduce incomes in communities dependent on wood processing industries. Meanwhile, the accumulated financial damage keeps mounting. The accumulated duties paid by Canadian softwood producers since 2017 are now valued at more than $7.2 billion US. This isn't money that disappears, it's cost that gets passed along to American consumers in the form of higher lumber prices. The international response has been predictably negative. The Forest Products Association of Canada said it was extremely frustrated and deeply concerned by the latest tariffs going into effect. Canada remains ready to negotiate a mutually acceptable resolution to this long-standing trade dispute and is taking action to build strength at home. Tim Hodgson, the federal minister of Energy and Natural Resources, said in a statement on Tuesday, "What's particularly galling is that Trump's tariff war is hitting hardest at a time when American families are already struggling with housing affordability. The lumber tariffs will make it more expensive to build new homes, renovate existing ones, or even do basic repairs. The news is devastating for communities like Grand Forks, BC, where local mill operations are already precarious. But the economic pain will spread far beyond Canada. Trump's lumber tariff disaster represents everything wrong with his approach to trade policy. It's based on false premises, ignores economic reality, and will ultimately hurt the very American families it claims to protect. Experts warn domestic supply and cost challenges remain significant. The president may claim victory, but American consumers will pay the price for this economic incompetence. The bottom line is simple. Trump's lumber tariffs are an economic disaster wrapped in nationalist rhetoric. They won't boost American production in any meaningful time frame, they won't improve national security, and they will make housing more expensive for millions of American families. 45% is a number, but behind that, there are real people. There's paychecks, there's families, there are whole communities. Those real people on both sides of the border are the ones who will suffer from Trump's trade war incompetence.